Okay, before I start, do you need to say anything, Sophie? Or
Yeah, I would like to introduce you quickly to everyone, if it's okay for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to tell everyone the context, Mathieu and I, we met Gareth on the first secure project. We've worked together in close collaboration, especially on developing the research career framework, where Gareth did a great and a huge amount of work, and essentially led the work package dedicated to the research career framework. And to introduce quickly Gareth, he's a principal consultant on open science at Technopolis Group. His work focuses on improving the implementation of and skills training of open science across Europe. And in this context, he will present today the results and output of a secure sister project called OPUS, and more particularly, the OPUS Research Assessment Framework, based on indicators to recognize and reward the wide diversity of researchers' activity, including open science. So now, Gareth, the floor is yours.
I'm going to talk a bit about what we call the OPUS Research Assessment Framework. Just curious, Sophie, what's the background of most of the people you see in the call here? Are they research managers or researchers or policy support colleagues?
There are researchers,
recruiters,
trainers. So it's like every different people from Adoc talent management. So
yeah,
very diverse public audience.
So I guess the bottom line before I start is that research assessment is done in a very specific manner at each institution. To be very clear, I'm going to talk about researcher assessment, assessing the researchers for the activities they do, and not a research assessment, not about assessing their research or the quality of their research or their outputs. This is really just looking at the activities that researchers do, whether they are employed or on part-time contracts or whatever type of contract at a university or a research institute. Could be outside academia as well, but typically inside, or if they are working on a project, for instance, under a funding agency, national funder, European Commission, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you name it, could be any type of research. So it's assessing their activities and the time they spend. Now, unfortunately, the focus on researcher assessment has been predominantly on publications. I'll be more specific, peer-reviewed publications. I'll be more specific in high impact factor or prestigious journals. And this means not just the number of publications that they produce, but also the journals they are submitting. One publication in Nature is typically enough to solidify a career for the rest of your life. But many researchers can be also very productive, and they may have many articles, not necessarily in Nature, but still in a variety of top journals in their field. And the whole point of this is that it's very skewed. Researchers do a lot more activities beyond publications, as we know. They are typically not rewarded for these activities, and usually the excellent researchers are those who focus on publications. So the competition is really about publishing in the best journals, and this is what makes the careers. And what we see now across Europe, certainly from the European Union, but now also in many of the member states, especially countries like the Netherlands or Germany or the UK, are pushing for a whole change to this system. And we'll see that with COARA, which I'll come to in a moment. So this project that we worked on, OPUS, it was called. Don't ask me about the acronym. It stands for Open and Universal Science. My colleague Gordon really liked the title, so we built a project around the title, but I don't think it really captures what we were doing. So we'll just refer to it as OPUS. This was a coordination and support action done under the European Union Horizon Europe Framework Programme for about 2 million. It doesn't say 2 million there because the UK wasn't associated with Horizon Europe, so had to pay their own contribution from national funding, and it ran for 3 years. Long story short, we were supposed to help universities or funders develop measures to reform researcher assessment, including open science. Actually, the focus was open science, but we stepped back from it. I'll explain that in a moment. Now, we didn't do this starting from scratch, let's say, and just make it all up ourselves. There's a lot been done on reforming research, including researcher assessment over the years. The original version of the Charter and Code for Researchers talked about new ways to reform. The San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, looked at reforming research assessment. The Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics tried to knuckle down on how to deploy metrics if you're going to use them. The Open Science Policy Platform Special Group under the European Commission had 2 working groups focusing on metrics. They made a whole shopping list of indicators which were mostly useless, about 150 of them. They acknowledged this themselves. It's a very twitchy topic, developing indicators for this type of work. Nobody really wants to propose them, and you'll see that most of them don't. We have the Hong Kong principles, so most of these things are principles and guidelines. They don't really zoom in on what we need to do. And now we have a new group, a new club called COARA, Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. This is already over, I think, 750, 800 organizations now, mostly universities, funders, who commit to the principles of COARA and basically aim to reform research assessment at their institutions. There's a list of things that they commit to. Basically, they want to move away from only looking at publications, move away from metrics, move away from quantitative assessment, and start, let's say, opening up the spectrum of what we're recognizing and rewarding for researchers. And to be very clear, I will talk about indicators, not metrics. So indicators for me are a way to set targets or evaluate the work that you're doing. They can be deployed quantitatively and or qualitatively. A metric in most cases is a specific type of indicator, which is quantitative. It usually looks at numbers or binary oppositions or simple choices. So at least for what I'm talking about, we're neither quantitative nor qualitative, and I'll come back to that. Now, to set all of this off, we came with our own set of principles to keep us on track. And also, when you're using this framework, it tells you roughly how we see it and how we feel it should be deployed. So this framework that we've made is basically a comprehensive set of indicators, specifically targeted at research performing and research funding organizations, basically universities and funders. They can be deployed in industry, but they won't. They might serve as input for industry colleagues to look at some of the activities that they're doing, but really it's more targeted at an academic environment. Number 2, this framework is agnostic. It does not apply for any specific country or discipline or type of organization. It's set at a general level so that it can be deployed in all of these and they can tailor it to what they need, whether that's specifically in a certain country or language, whether that's a specific research discipline, or whether that's a specific type of organization, be it a university, be it a research institute, be it a funder, even be it a company or government, although for those, I think it's a bit more work. 3, we do not focus on either quantitative or qualitative assessment. The indicators are framed in a way that they can be deployed in either case or mix of both. That really comes down to how you interpret and apply the indicators. 4, as I said, we focus on researchers and their activities, but we also focus on research projects where a researcher may be a principal investigator. So you try to separate the researcher from their project that's being funded, or where you may have a group of researchers in a project and you're looking at a cohort. We really did not want to go beyond groups of researchers. It is not intended to start looking at and assessing research groups, large groups, or institutes, or faculties, or even whole universities or funding programs. You could scale it up, but in my view, you'd need to adjust indicators and change the framework. So this is, at least from our perspective, primarily focused on researchers and their projects at the project level. 6 and 7 are 2 sides of a coin, and this is important. We originally started out only looking at open science and then realized, of course, not everything can be open, not everything should be open, not everything needs to be open. To only focus on open science misses the bigger picture of what we're all doing. And thus we zoomed back or out or up, and basically tried to look, first of all, at what are the activities that researchers actually do. And then if we were to focus on open science, what would we focus on? So this framework is like a coin with two sides. We have a generic side, which looks at the activities generally. Doesn't matter whether they're open or not. But if you wanted to focus on open science, you can flip the coin at any stage and zoom in and see how could you actually then start targeting open science, which you'll see an example of in a bit. 8, given that these are indicators, we've broken it up into separate stages or types of ontological activities. We have recognized processes, things that are starting and ongoing, outputs, the results of a process, concrete, typically results of a process, and an outcome, a concrete result of these activities or outputs that you've done. For our outcomes, we look usually at immediate or midterm, short-term outcomes. We did not look at long-term or large-scale outcomes. How has Gareth, as a researcher, influenced society? This is way too big and fuzzy. It's impossible to really link to. So we've kept it very simple, focused, and targeted on things you can actually show have a direct consequence, as you'll see. 9, linguistically, language-wise, we have formulated the indicators in a bit of a sneaky manner. Let's put it this way. On the one side, we have tried to limit the number of indicators so we don't end up with 10,000 because you're zooming in on every mini activity. On the other side, we did not want only a group of 10 indicators, which would serve nobody and be too generic. So we've tried to set the level kind of at the right line where we cover all the activities that researchers do, at least the main activities, and that the indicators, on the one hand, guide the organization so they know what we are intending, but at the same time, it does not bind them, and they have a lot of flexibility to adjust the indicators, make them more generic, make them more specific, break them up into sub-indicators if they want, deploy it qualitatively or qualitatively. So they're set in a manner which is clear in what we intend. It guides what they should be doing, but flexible at the same time for them to interpret as they wish and adjust and so forth. We'll see an example. The last one, and it's critical, is we do not tell anybody to do anything. We do not suggest what's more important. We do not suggest how they should deploy it. We do not tell them how they should implement this. The selection of the indicators, the refinement of the indicators, the prioritization of indicators, rankings of indicators, weighing of indicators, and deployment of the indicators is completely left to the organizations. For this sole purpose, this is why they will actually use it. It's essentially a box of Lego bricks that will give them ideas on how they can reform assessment. They all already have assessment systems in place. None are starting new. So all they're doing now really is looking for ways to reform assessment and move towards, let's say, a better way of doing this. They do this slowly. They do not do this revolutionarily. So they will only typically pick some new things to adjust. In my view, like I said, this is a coin. Each institution will look to see what they're already doing. They focus on publications. And then they will look generically to see what they can add. Maybe they want to add data activities. Maybe they want to add citizen science activities. And then they will flip the coin and see which parts of open science they actually want to support and implement. So for each institution, it'll be a selection process. And then how they do that themselves is completely up to them. We're not going to check. They probably won't even quote us, which is fine. We had a first version of the framework. I won't go into it. Those links are there if you want to click on them. You can have a look. As a result of this first version, as a result of piloting at many of our organizations in the project, as a result of consultations with researchers and organizations, we refined it and came to this final version. This is a high-level overview of what we've done. It's a lot more complicated than this. But basically, we've broken up the types of activities that they do into 4. We have research activities, education activities, leadership/management activities, and so-called valorization activities. Now, for research, we have the key things that they will be busy with: proposals, writing proposals, developing methodologies, preparing or planning data management, collecting, managing, curating data, archiving data, eventually long-term data preservation. We have software, not so widespread, but it is important for many researchers. Publications, of course, materials, developing physical materials, whether it's in a laboratory, whether it's in the arts and humanities, building a sculpture, doesn't matter. And basically reviewing. Now, you'll immediately think of publications, but in reality, you can review across all of these. Most researchers will, of course, review proposals, review publications, but some do review data, some do security reviews of software, testing software, and of course, you can do this for these other categories. Education, this is developing a program or a course or a set of classes, developing educational materials, whether it's linked to your courses or not, it could be completely separate. Actual teaching of students, whether they're bachelor, master, PhD or beyond. Supervising students, whether they're bachelor, master, PhD or beyond. And skills development, me as a researcher doing learning new skills, following classes. It costs time, and thus I need to be not necessarily rewarded for it, but certainly recognized for what I've done and how I've spent my time at the Institute or funder. Leadership, this is basically about managing staff, managing or running projects, research projects, project management, managing or having a leadership role in your organization. It could be as a group or team leader, it could be as a director of an institute, it could be a dean of a faculty, it could be the rector of a university, any of the leadership positions that a researcher might take. And lastly, being recognized for their expertise. This means being invited into expert panels, advisory boards, governmental panels, citizen panels, for instance. Also recognition through awards. You can think of the Nobel Prize, but you can have a whole scala of different awards that researchers can get. And the last one is valorization, basically science communication, giving talks or webinars or classes online or physical. They can be to specific expert audiences or general citizens or anywhere in between, but also engaging intersectorally, whether that's engaging with companies or governments or third sector, or you name it, any type of it can also be, of course, university engagement, inter-academic engagement, but beyond. Exploitation, so managing intellectual property rights, how to license, how to copyright, how to patent, and so forth. And lastly, entrepreneurship, so developing, let's say, a spin-off or a startup, creating new products, new services, and commercializing them for the market. Now, the point to note here is that there is no one researcher that will do all of these activities. At least I don't think so. The idea is that researchers at any given stage of their career will be doing multiple of these activities. The little lights here will shine up differently for the research disciplines or the organization or where the researcher is in their career. I would expect an early career researcher mostly to be working on data and publications predominantly. Education-wise, probably teaching. I doubt they'd have a leadership role at an early stage. Valorization, I wouldn't expect it, but they might be working on science communication, or they might give an occasional talk. They might be engaging intersectorally. If you flip this to a more senior researcher, I would certainly be expecting them to be working on proposals, probably less on research as they scale up. More on reviews here, for instance, developing programs, some teaching, certainly supervising, certainly somewhere in that leadership category doing some activities there or being recognized for what they've done, and potentially, but not necessarily, doing some valorization. Then you might just get individuals that are specializing in certain things. Gareth might specialize in research exclusively, working on data, publications, maybe reviews. Another researcher might be doing some research, but specialize more in education, or they might be working more on valorization, depending on who they are. It could be, for instance, a citizen scientist. At Leiden University, for instance, where I spent many years, we originally only recognized a research professor. This was the only way to become a professor in Leiden. But as a consequence of the reality that most researchers teach, develop programs, and spend a lot of time doing this, Leiden has recognized a two-track system. You can become a research professor, where you spend most of your time, let's say 80%, doing research, writing proposals, supervising PhDs and postdocs, or you can become a so-called education professor, where you're not expected to do much research. It's around 40%, but you are expected to spend most of your time developing courses, teaching, and supervising others to teach. So you see that they're recognizing the reality of doing these different activities. And one of the real reasons for this was those individuals who were doing most of the teaching were never getting promoted. Because if they're teaching, they're not writing publications. If they're not writing publications, they're not getting promoted, right? So they had to create this two-track system, or you'd have a whole group of researchers that basically could never progress. In the Netherlands, by the way, a professorship is a chair. It is not a natural progression for everybody like in Canada, the United States, or in some other countries. So you only get the chair when it is vacated or created. And thus it's competitive, right? So what they've basically done is now created new chairs for these education professors. They are still a professor, they are still a researcher, they're just now focusing more on education and being recognized for it. In reality, you should probably create multiple chairs for different groupings of activities. But that's a little step too far for Leiden for now. Okay, last point here is that this is the framework overall. As I said, it's two sides of a coin. I'll show you what that looks like, but as you zoom in, we go look at all of the different indicators for these activities. As I said, for process, output, and outcome. And then what you can do is you can flip this coin for openness. So it's a lens for open science. And we've not done this, but basically teamwork, in my view, is critical for all of this. Now, we do not have an indicator for teamwork. The reason for that is it actually, in my view, applies everywhere. You can have teamwork at any step, any stage here. So the way we would see this is that teamwork should be taken into consideration at the organization. It should certainly be recognized and rewarded. And then the researcher, of course, will specify exactly what type of teamwork is involved. Could be research collaboration. It could be working with another colleague on a proposal. For instance, Sophie, we've worked on proposals together. It could be on managing a project together, but it could also be any one of these activities, right? Okay, let's have a look at what this looks like. Oh, I realize I have to zoom down. I'm going to take an example of publications because that's what most people know. Now, the reason why we broke this up into process, output, and outcome is more for the organizations to pay attention. A researcher at any stage of their career, or any stage even in a process, let's say, can be either at the beginning, already have outputs, or have outcomes. So at any moment of assessment, they could be at any stage here on any of those activities. I may be writing a proposal at the time of assessment, right? Should it not count because it's not yet been submitted? Of course not. If I've spent months working on this, I should be able to find my way in my assessment by saying, look, I've spent 2 months building a consortium and writing a proposal. The same for if I get to the fact that I've submitted a proposal, but have not yet got an answer. It has been submitted, it's been accepted, it's been recognized, but now I'm waiting on the results. The outcome is whether or not you get the proposal. It does not mean that this is a negative outcome. If I get it, great, that's very positive, right? If I don't get it, it can still be positive, or it can be a moment of reflection for the organization. For instance, I may write a proposal for Horizon Europe, €2 million proposal, my organization gets $500,000, and I don't get it. However, when you look closely, you see that there were 100 applications, only one was granted, but we passed the threshold to get granted. We just didn't, we were unlucky enough that there was others better than us, and there wasn't enough money. So in European Commission terms, I would have received the seal of excellence saying, I did everything right, there just wasn't enough money for me. And this is a positive thing. Now, what should happen is in the countries where I'm from or working, they should be looking to see if they can fund this proposal, because it's passed all thresholds and reviews and is essentially an excellent proposal, should be funded. But what it also tells the organization is, this person is actually good at writing proposals. Maybe we should get this person to focus a bit more on this or teach the colleagues. This is different from if I submit a proposal and there was only one application and I didn't get it. And I clearly scored under the threshold, right? That might tell my supervisor or my higher ups that I do not have the experience in writing proposals, or I'm not so good at it. So either I spend less time on this perhaps, or they could maybe partner me up with somebody who's good at it or put me on a course. So it is not the case that assessment should also be just negative or positive. You really need to think carefully about what the assessment is telling you. So for publications here, we basically look at publications that maybe are being written at the time of an assessment, aimed for a peer-reviewed journal. You'll note I don't mention whether that journal is open access or not, or the impact factor of that journal or the publisher. I don't care, but the organization may set requirements or may set a bar. They may decide what counts or does not count. The publication may be submitted, waiting on an answer. The publication may be published, good news. If it's published, you may then look at accesses such as views or downloads or any type of access that you may have physically or digitally. There's quite a lot depending on the medium, such as software has a lot of different types of accesses, or it may be cited. Here again, you can specify what you mean by a citation. Could be citations in only peer-reviewed journals, could be other types of citations. Now, this is the general framework. If we flip the coin and lens this for open science, you see it gets a bit more complicated. Now, when we look at open science, I see basically two types of activities that you can do. You can either be working on the topic of open science, or you can open up whatever you're doing in an open manner. You open up the process, you open up the outputs, or you look at open outcomes. So here, if you look carefully, you zoom in only on those publications that are about open science, or those publications which have been made openly available, whether that's at the process stage, whether that's at the submission stage, or whether that's at the publication stage. If you're opening it up from the start or in the middle, so to speak, we're talking about basically a form of open preprint or even open peer review. It's not for everybody. Again, we're not suggesting it, but it is a possibility. Some colleagues do it, especially in certain fields. If you're only looking at those publications that have been published, then of course you're looking at peer-reviewed open access journals. Here again, we do not specify what openly available is. I'm an ambassador for Plan S, so I should tell you that actually we should only look at those publications that are in open access journals that are non-hybrid. They do not merge the different types of systems, subscription, pay-per-view, let's say, and so forth. And it should be immediately available upon publication. There should be no embargo. But like I said, we leave this to the organizations. They may set their own restrictions. In Belgium, for instance, there's a 6-month mandate by law, I believe, that articles need to be put in an institutional repository, I think within 6 months of publication. So you see there that Belgium actually allows an embargo of 6 months. This is no doubt because publishers were pushing back, saying they're losing money by not having this embargo period, right? They actually usually argued for 12 or 24 months to recoup their earnings. So here you see, we basically zoom in on open science, whether it's about it or whether it's opened up. And if we really want to focus on, for instance, outcomes, we only look at those accesses or citations from open access journals or open access publications. What this means in reality is an institution has a choice of extra rewarding open science or being more restrictive and focusing on open science. The University of Liège, for instance, the former rector there, Bernard Rentier, was quite extreme in his views on open access, and he basically mandated immediate institutional deposition of articles from all researchers into the institutional repository. As a consequence of this drastic action, Liège has, I think, the highest green open access rate in Europe, if not beyond. Was drastic. There were repercussions for those who didn't do it. So here we're not even talking about assessment. They do it or they get punished. So I won't go into the difference between mandating and assessment. Critically here for assessment, I would say that you're trying to incentivize and reward colleagues to do this activity. Okay, these are the indicators. There's a whole shopping list of them. Like I said, The point is not that the researcher does everything. The point is that in an evaluation or an assessment, a researcher can explain the activities they've done, and they do not only focus on publications. How this is deployed is completely up to the organization. My strong plea is that it should be done in a simple, lightweight manner, probably digitally, with a nice digital interface in a very simple format with simple questions. Gareth, here is your yearly evaluation. Please let us know which activities you've done across these 4 categories: research, education, leadership, and management. Here is an example of activities. Let us know at what stage you are and roughly what you've done. Now, this should not take a week to fill in. If it does, we've missed the point. It should be quick enough that the researcher can fill it in. Even better, this should be linked to an automatic data collection system, internal and external. CRIS system should be deployed, collecting data about activities the researcher has also already done, whether it's proposals, because you need a stamp from the university, or whether it's publications because they're indexing what you're doing, or whether it's classes you teach. This could already be feeding this into an interface for the researcher, basically asking them, Gareth, are these your classes? Are these your publications? I click yes or no, and I can add or more. It could also go beyond. It could also start extracting from ORCID, for instance, any linking that I have on ORCID that goes beyond the university websites or the university data collection. It could link to Zenodo. It could link to any external archive or indexing system that's tracking what Gareth is doing. Could be, for instance, the OpenAir research graph. The whole point of this is that you're helping the researcher quickly fill in what they've done on a given year, and you build a picture of it. Now, like I said, it does not have to be quantitative. It does not only have to focus on the number of things I did. It could be deployed instead qualitatively. Gareth, tell us your most influential research activities of the last year. Tell us what you spent most of your time doing research-wise. And then there I have the flexibility to fill in from my perspective what I've done. The university still may have a bigger overview of what I've done, but they're asking me specifically what is most important. So this can be deployed by the university in a number of ways. It could also be the old-fashioned Word document that you get sent. Please fill this in with a load of questions. But it could be, something more innovative like a digital interface. By the way, OpenAir is working on such an interface now. It's a researcher/organizational profile page where the researcher can fill in the different activities that they're doing. And on the flip side of that mirror, the organization can track and see what's going on. And they're using the OPUS framework, albeit very selectively. They've selected things to trial. So again, it's not the case that I think anybody's actually ever going to use the OPUS framework in its entirety. It should simply serve as a discussion, as an idea for them to start looking at what they can reform and the things they can focus on. But there's a bigger discussion needed on what they should actually pick, how they should rank and weigh it, how they should deploy it, and they should be doing that with their researchers, preferably not in isolation and then pushing them on them. If they do that, it will simply not work. I'll wrap up quickly. This is just to say that next to the indicators, we have so-called interventions which support the implementation of this. These are aimed at the organization to help them, give them ideas on how they can do this. We have a list of 10 general interventions. I'm not going to go through them all, but it's to give you an idea or give the organization an idea of what they can do. For instance, collect existing best practices on the reform of research assessment. There's already a lot done out there. COARA is now also working on action plans so you can get ideas from your colleagues. Ensure your researchers are aware of the reasons to reform researcher assessment, for instance. In other words, make sure your researchers, your staff, your policymakers are aware of what's going on, why you're doing it. Frameworks, for instance, like OPUS, but there could be other frameworks, and the steps you need to take to do this, to get change happening. Not just bringing your researchers in, but approving piloting or adopting new policies or adopting new procedures or implementation, and making sure at every step that the researchers are supported. As you see here, when you look at the interventions, we broke it into 4 different types of support measures: policy support measures, resources to help the researchers, raising awareness for the researchers or the evaluators or any of the support staff that support this. It could even be recruiters, and also training. So actually training these individuals to do this. We have a whole list of specific interventions, for instance, on policy-wise, And as we lens the indicators for openness and non-openness, or rather openness and genericity, we do this as well for the openness spectrum. So if you're zooming in on open science, these are things you can do to help support that process. I will finish up just by saying that we actually did trialing at 3 of our universities and 2 of our funders, university in Lisbon, in Cyprus, and in Rijeka, Croatia, and with the national Romanian funder and with the national Lithuanian funder. This was a wide era call, so it focused on widening European countries. And here you see that they had all sorts of deployment at different institutes. Could be law, it could be information management, could be medicine, it could be specific programs at a funder. And here it wasn't put as a mandate, except in one case, as one of the funders. Here it was done in a very open, discussive manner. All of the researchers that were in the cohorts were there actively, positively. They volunteered. They were not, let's say, judged on what they were doing. There was no repercussions for whether it was good or bad. This was simply just to start collecting the data, to see how this would work when you deploy it, and to get their feedback. What was surprising was that they were heavily engaged. They very much appreciated the open approach and the support for it. And when we started looking at indicators, they started breaking up indicators into sub indicators. It actually got a bit too detailed. So maybe that comes down to the nature of researchers themselves. But in principle, the researchers were very, very happy to do this. I'm going to stop there. I see we're approaching time, and I don't know if you colleagues have questions. And if they do, please go ahead.
Thank you, Gareth, for this presentation. Is there any question, any remark for this presentation?
And maybe while you're looking at people there, a question I guess I have for you guys is what is the relevance of research assessment for a recruiter? Now, in reality, I guess you have to assess the researchers you're trying to help, right? And I'm not 100% sure how you assess them or how you categorize them. This is very much focused on the organization itself, right? But in a way, it's also showing you their skills. What is it they're good at, right? What is it they have experience in?
Yeah, usually our approach is mostly competency-based. And I actually had a question on that, because you mentioned these 4 groups of activities. Yeah. Where are they coming from, all these activities? Did you start from R1, R4, R2, R3, R4 list of activities, or where are they coming from, all these activities?
So, I mean, we were collecting, of course, activities that we know researchers do, but this was through a lot of consultations with researchers at different levels. What do you do? What do you spend your time on? And of course, we had to decide what is a primary activity and a non-primary activity, right? Do we really need to separate methods from materials? Well, the answer from the researchers was yes, because they see them as different activities, right? Do we really need to include software when not many do it? Yes, because those who do focus on software want it recognized. So the difficulty, the skill was to try and identify the main activities without missing something. And like I said, linguistically at certain levels, even if you miss something, you can still fit it in, or it can still be added to a specific category. So we did not want to separate them into ones for early career and senior career. It just doesn't work, because they're random across the board. There are statistical tendencies, of course. Here we just wanted to capture the main activities that they do, and then the flexibility is that they can find themselves in it. If I look at myself, for instance, at any given time, I guess I would be writing proposals, developing methodologies, collecting data, writing publications. If I look at education, I certainly develop teaching courses. I develop resources. I teach. I supervise less, but it's still there. I don't do much skills development anymore, but I certainly did. Leadership, I manage projects. I manage staff. I have a organizational management. I'm recognized for expertise in certain fields. Valorization, I do a lot of science communication. I give a lot of talks. I engage intersectorally. I'm in industry myself, so I engage with academic and governmental organizations, and I do a lot of exploitation. So I highlight a lot of boxes there myself. What the percentage is, I have no idea. What I should be rewarded on, I have no idea. But I certainly do a lot of it.
Yeah, that was my next question about that. Like you mentioned that all the researchers might pick some of activities across these four areas, but how do you make the distinction between the across careers of researchers? Because this can be also really relevant for assessment as well.
Yeah.
And together with that, after doing the assessment, what is like great researchers are doing the assessment, what is the next phase of that? What did you think about coming next?
Let's say that, first of all, I mean, it's I'm being a bit extreme in the when I say that they're usually only rewarded for publications. Of course, they're rewarded for bringing in money. They might not be private organizations, but most researchers bringing in big grants of several million are certainly recognized for it. And, you know, the university has a tendency to bump them up the ranks. I'm coming from a private background, at Technopolis at least, or one of my hats. There, my boss is focused on proposals. How much are you bringing in? And they want to know that you're successfully bringing in projects and successfully bringing in, ultimately, money, because that's what they do, right? They need to sustain their activities, and somebody needs to pay it. They're not paid from taxpayer money like universities, so they need to actually actively generate income. So, you know, that's what my boss looks at. I've brought in for them, I don't know, in the score of 5 to 10 million already, certainly more than I'm paid. So they're happy with that. The next thing they look at is project implementation. Now that you've got the project, did you do a good job? For instance, is the European Commission happy with the work you did? So this is how the evaluation will work for me. At organizations, they will, as I said, focus much more on the publications, on the teaching, because most researchers must teach. So they will look to see if you have teaching experience and can manage teaching yourself, right, or courses. And then secondly, the proposals are not always a necessity, but they are certainly very welcome if you're an experienced proposal writer or project manager, you know.
Okay. Yeah, I was also wondering, because like, as you mentioned, there are some countries which are pushing for this kind of change in assessment, and some might be less pushing. And so it means that there is a national dimension of research assessment. How do you do to go against that, and to like, do you think that if few countries now are engaging in this kind of assessment, it will push other countries to go through in this direction? Or what is the picture of all of that?
So we should be careful here. We really need to separate a few things, right? So first of all, research assessment can be embedded in national laws and regulations. In Spain, for instance, researchers are a research position in some cases, in many cases, is a civil servant status. So you're applying for a governmental position, right, as a research professor. What that means is there are clear criteria. One of those criteria is the number of publications in a top-tier journal, an international one journal, for instance. In other words, they check if this journal has a specific impact factor and it falls within a prestigious category. You cannot avoid this. This is enshrined in law. So if you want to reform research assessment there, you can do what you want, but the first thing you need to change is the law. And this takes time and a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
Now, where it's not enshrined in law, you can, of course, change it more, but then you hit another barrier. And this is the research culture. Researchers, contradictorily, you would expect them to be very progressive. They're the most traditional people I've ever met. When they say that they build on the shoulder of giants, they build very, very slowly and very cautiously, right? What this means is, in many countries, they push back against any reform on what they know. Because the way they see it is, this is tried and tested. It has worked until now. Why should we change it? And if we change it, we're going to destroy science, right? That's just on the assessment. When you come to open science, it's even worse. They are very much against it. They, senior researchers, not the juniors. The juniors we have here, they're all very, very positive and open. They grew up, you know, sharing, brushing their teeth on Facebook, on all these social media platforms. So when you tell them research should be open, it's not even a barrier for them. They get the idea, right? They might have restrictions or reservations, but they get the idea. But when you come against a lot of the senior researchers, as I have, they really don't want to change it. They do not know it. It is not the system they know. And so for positive reasons, they want to stick to that system because they can help and understand that system. A change they find is drastic, right? And especially with open science. So what we've seen with open science in many countries towards Middle Eastern, Southern Europe especially, is a pushback. And actually a retrograde step where first they introduced measures and now they're going back on these measures because they understand that older system. So the barrier in most cases is cultural and traditional. And this is why awareness is critical. And this is why bringing the researchers in and explaining to them what you're doing is critical. As a last example, I give a lot of talks abroad. I used to give a lot of talks, for instance, in Vienna at one of the, let's say, the Vienna Biocenter is called. It's a mixture of 4 specific research institutes. It's quite prestigious. They are heavily focused on publications. It is sole work that they do, research and publications. They go in and they're gone within 3 years. And basically, it's a career step builder. They go in and then they go get a better job. Now, there, when I give talks on open science, usually to the PhDs, for the first hour, they're completely against it. And they're against it because of all the things they've heard. Now, I don't try to sell it. I just explain to them what it is, how it currently is, and why it is. And usually within the second hour, they've completely flipped and don't understand why we are locking up all science. They understand that you don't need to open things up immediately. They understand that you keep things for commercialization purposes or security reasons, but they just do not get why it's not being opened more. They do not get why we're not publishing in open journals. They do not get why we're paying to publish. And I don't either, to be honest. The point here is that it's the awareness that is blocking a lot of this change, I don't think we should change to change, but I do think we should change things that are clearly not working, or at least not working well for the majority of researchers. They're working well for a very specific set of researchers, but not for most of them.
Yeah, and on your also on the slide where you were describing the indicators of publication, can you go back to it? So, okay, there is output of a submission, but then there is published, accessed, and cited. But yesterday I had a discussion with a researcher who told me that he published a first paper. He's studying like a relationship between cells and bacteria, and basically, and he's studying all the genomic around. He did a first publication on the bacteria genomic, and now he submitted a second paper studying the genomic of the host, of the cell host, and he's fighting with the editor now, because the editor told him, but the data were already published, so it's not new anymore. So you also need to take into account that all the system should be changed also in the journal side and in the publication side to go across all these indicators as well. So it's bigger.
Beyond publications, right?
Sorry?
It's beyond publications. It's not just the publications. And the second point, that's why we talk about interventions, is if you say that we're going to now start rewarding many of these categories, you now need to make sure that they understand what that is and you can help them. Imagine I say, I now want you all to start opening up your data. What does that mean? Most people don't know what open data is. So open data, by the way, is completely useless. If it's not tagged properly for good metadata and managed correctly, it's useless. So actually, we should really talk about fair data, right? Very well managed metadata.
Mm-hmm.
But how do they know to do this? They won't know. So who's going to teach them? That means I need to now have data stewards or policy colleagues who understand data management to support them and train them. Where are they going to put it? Does the institution provide a data repository? They probably don't. If they don't, they need to build one. If they don't, and they don't want to build one, they need to be able to assign them externally. Maybe they can set up an account with Zenodo, for instance. Maybe they'll deploy Google Drive. So every time you make a decision to change something, you have to make sure that you have the support measures in place, the infrastructure, the people, the resources, the time, right? The resources to do all of this. So there's consequences on everything that you change. For the publications, let me give you a good example. So in Ireland, Science Foundation Ireland is one of the main funders there. I think they may have changed name now to Teagasc, but anyway, they decided to move more towards qualitative assessment, actually completely to qualitative assessment almost. I don't fully agree. I think it should be a mix in between, but they've gone qualitative. And what they ask is, they don't say, how many publications did you have in top tier journals? They don't say, what's your H index or your citations rates, right? They say, tell us your most influential publication last year. And you explain why it was influential. And the example they give to help people understand what they're looking for is, one of their researchers published an article in a non-peer-reviewed, as in non-expert peer-reviewed journal aimed at nurses. They're in the medical field. And why they picked this article was, it has a readership in the hundreds of thousands of readers. And as a consequence of this, short article they wrote, they have been engaged consistently by so many nurses and colleagues, asking for more information, asking for working on projects, asking for collaboration, asking for advice. And in other words, this had the most impact for them personally and professionally. Wasn't a peer-reviewed journal. It certainly won't make the news anywhere, but at least for them individually, this was a massive article in a non-important, so to speak, journal. So this is the example. It's not about citations per se. It's also about how you deploy it. The question you ask the researcher, or the freedom you give for them to fill it in and interpret it,
I thank you so much, Gareth, for everything. And I would be happy to talk about that more with you, because I am really interested in that. So it could be nice to have to follow this discussion further on.
I'm sure we will. I wish everybody good luck. I don't know if you've more meetings today. So have a great Christmas and New Year. And Sophie, I guess I'll talk to you in the new year.
Yeah, and have a safe flight.
Thank you.
Bye.
I will.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.